everyone, so together we are going to do the color wheel, practicing mixing all of the colors here that you see, and also just practicing some techniques to do with acrylic paints. So go ahead and write your name at the top. We can just label this top area here is going to be our color wheel. So color wheel. Alright, to set up the color wheel, I'm just going to kind of mimic the one that I have here. So I am going to start at the top with yellow. And then make a triangle. This side will be blue. This is going to be our red. And once we start mixing, we'll come back and we'll label our colors. Alright, so the three colors that you see here are our primary colors. So in your paint palette, you're going to need red, yellow, and blue. You're also going to need for later a black, a white, and a magenta. We have the magenta here because the pigment in the red sometimes doesn't make a nice violet. It actually makes a very deep burgundy. So the magenta mixes better with our cyan or our blue and gives us a better violet that we're going to need. So these are the colors that you will need. Remember, the less paint you use, the less you're going to have to clean up. So I typically don't usually even get this much. I usually get less. So there's no need to overflow your paint palette with a lot of paint. A little goes a long way, and again, it's going to be less to clean up later. Alright, so to go ahead and start, you can just grab a brush, any brush. Remember to, when painting, the smaller the brush you have, the less paint you're going to grab. So if you tend to be kind of like a heavy painter, let's say your paintings take a really long time to dry, it's probably best just to use a smaller brush so you're not grabbing too much paint. Alright, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start at the top of my color wheel. I'm just going to grab straight yellow. Alright, so I've added yellow, and you can do squares or circles or whatever. You can do a star if you want. I'm going to swirl at the bottom of my cup to rinse all that paint off. Tap and touch. So tap my cup, touch my paper towel. We learned this with watercolor. Then I'm going to grab red, just straight red, same thing. Circle at the bottom of my cup, tap and touch, and go ahead and grab your blue. Again, circle at the bottom of your cup and tap and touch. Alright, so from here we're going to make our secondary colors, which are orange, green, and violet. So these are the colors that the primary colors make when you mix them together. So if I mix red and yellow together, I'm going to get an orange. If I mix yellow and blue, I'm going to get a green. And if I mix blue and red together, I'm going to get violet. Okay? Now if I mix all three of these together, what you're going to end up with is a black or kind of like a muddy brown. Okay? So let's go ahead and start with, let's go clockwise. So we'll start with green. So in order to make green, I'm going to grab my paintbrush. I'm going to scoop up a little bit of yellow, and I'm just going to move it into a new location. Then I'm going to scoop up some blue, move it to that same location, and start to mix. And you'll notice that I'm starting to get a green. And you can just apply that right in the middle between them, because we're going to have two more on either side. So make sure that you're just leaving that room for those intermediate colors. Alright, and then rinse your brush off. We're going to come down and we're going to make violet. So again, like I was saying, if you mix the red and the blue together, sometimes it gets more of like a burgundy instead of a violet. This is where you're actually going to change this up, and we're going to use magenta instead. So I'm going to take a little bit of blue, move it to a new location, grab some of that magenta, move it to that location, and start to mix, and you'll notice that I start to get a nice violet. And then you're just going to add that in the middle of your blue and red. Now to make orange, we're going to mix red and yellow together. And there you go. Now we have our secondary colors. All right, so now we're going to make our intermediate colors, which are actually going to be our secondary colors and a primary color mixed together to make the colors in the middle. So we're going to start to make these colors here by mixing a primary and a secondary together. So secondary, primary, primary, secondary, secondary, primary, primary, secondary, secondary, primary. Okay? So you can use the colors, of course, that you've already created on your palette. So I want to make a yellow green. So what I'm gonna do in order to make a yellow green is I'm just gonna add more yellow to my green to make that more of a lime colored green. Okay. To get a blue green, you're gonna add more blue. Okay, then you're gonna keep going. So to get a blue violet, I'm gonna add more blue to my violet. And then add more magenta to get a red violet. Could probably use a little bit more. That's better. All right, now let's go ahead and label our color wheels so we know what the name of our colors are and where they are on our color wheel. All right, now that we know how to mix our colors to make all of our other colors, we're gonna start practicing some painting techniques with acrylic paints. So first things first is obviously you have a number of different size brushes that you have the choices of using. As mentioned, you know, the smaller the brush, the smaller or less paint that you're going to pick up. So if you're more of a heavy painter, sometimes it's best to just always use a smaller brush so you're not using too much paint. But of course each brush is going to be able to do something different. So if you have a bigger wide brush like this one, I'm just going to pick up a color to demonstrate. If you use the fat side, it's going to cover more space much quicker. Okay, because it's fatter, so it's going to cover that space a lot quicker, like I said, and just fill in that space really nicely. It's also really great to create edges because it has a nice flat side. So if you use your brush, and notice how I'm getting just a little bit of paint at a time, a little bit goes a long way. If you use the edge of the brush, so the thinner side, if you press and drag, it creates a really, really nice line. So it's really great to outline because then you can kind of press and drag and then start to like fill in spaces if you wanted to kind of like outline first and then fill in that area. Okay. You also have, you know, smaller square brushes, which will also do the same thing. They're just gonna take up smaller spaces, so not as wide. And then you have round brushes. Okay, round brushes, they typically have round edges. So you'll notice here at the top it's very round versus this side where it's very straight and flat. And these are great for, you know, little zigzags or creating little flowers. Okay. Also notice that when I am painting, I am, you know, painting with an angle. So I'm holding my brush at an angle here. I'm not, you know, straight up. You can do this way, but I'm not pressing down. So I'm not doing this to where my bristles are being frayed out. That's going to ruin the paintbrush. Okay, so you don't want to press too hard and ruin the brushes this way. Okay. All right, wet on wet. So what you're gonna do here is go ahead and just pick up a color and kind of paint like a square background. Now, acrylic paint dries pretty quickly, so if you want to do this technique, you do have to work a little faster than you normally would with maybe watercolors. So I've got a wet painted background of red, and I'm not going to rinse my brush out. You could, but you don't have to for wet on wet, since the paint is wet. When I add the other colors on there, it's just gonna mix with it anyway. So I'm gonna kind of dip the corner of my brush into like this white, and I'm just gonna start to create kind of like streaks. Okay. So wet on wet is a way to mix the colors while it's on your paper or canvas in that place, and create interesting textures, but also mix to make a new color. Instead of using your palette, you can also mix it onto your paper. But because they're both wet, they will mix and make other colors or something interesting. I will say for this one, you need to be careful. I typically try to stay within only mixing 3 colors. Because if you go a little bit more than that, it's just going to get muddy and turn into maybe like a brown because there's too many colors being mixed at once. All right, a gradient or blending. So you're going to pick one color and you're going to start at the top and do kind of like a graded wash, which means going from light to dark. So I'm going to start at the top, and then I'm just going to continue to add a layer underneath until the paint starts to run free from my brush. Okay. Then I'm going to pick up another color, and I'm going to do it the same way, except I'm going to start kind of down here, and I'm going to start to bring it into that other color. You'll notice that they are going to start to blend together to make a green. you're just going to continue to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth with those colors. You can also blend by using the corner of your brush. So I can do one color on one side of the corner, like so. Then I can pick up another color. Let's see, I'll do red. Like so. So now I've got double, okay? And then when I start to paint them together, they start to mix with one another. Okay. You just have to remember what side of the brush each one is on. Alright, so fades, this is pretty similar fades are pretty similar to this one, except you're only going to choose one color on one side instead of two. So if I do black on one corner of my brush, okay, and I don't have another color there, so it's going to kind of do a faded look. And notice how I'm like continuing to add layers to it to get it to fade a little bit more. Okay. All right, and then splatter. For splatter, I'm gonna get a teeny tiny bit of water onto my brush. I'm gonna pick up my color. And then I'm gonna lightly tap. And I'm gonna tap kind of using this as my guideline to tap inside this area. I don't wanna smack my brush. I don't wanna hit it or fling it anywhere. Be mindful of the people around you and notice how I'm pretty close, okay? So just a teeny tiny bit of water, a little bit of color, tap, tap, tap. All right. So here, a tint is going to be a hue plus white. So tint equals white, hue is color. Shade is black, and then if you plus the hue, which is color, you're going to get a darker color, okay? Hue equals color. So, for example, if I do yellow, okay, yellow plus white, okay, if I mix these two, and I'm gonna get a nice light yellow, okay? Now, if I take yellow plus black, I am going to get a darker shade of yellow. Or maybe even like a green. Okay? And then hue equals color. Alright, so to get a gradient from a light to dark, okay, that's how you would make one using the tints and shades, okay? So pick a color, any color, and let's practice making a gradient scale or a value scale from from dark to light. So monochromatic. Okay. So we're going to go from dark to light. So that means white's going to be here and black's going to be here. Okay? Start with black. Add a little bit of yellow in there. A little bit more yellow. All right, now the best way to clean your paint palette is to run it under low pressure water. Okay, so you want to hold your paint palette at an angle and direct it towards the wall, okay? Because if you use hard pressure, the water is going to splatter and it's going to hit onto your clothes. So you want to point it away from you and low pressure. Okay. You can also use your paintbrushes to help rinse out your paint palette quicker without having to touch it with your fingers. All right, so some of you might think that this paint palette is clean, but it is still not clean, and I will be checking them. So make sure that you are cleaning your paint palette completely of paint and water. Now, that's a clean palette. And then you just place it in the drying rack like so to dry. Then you can go to rinsing your cup and brushes. So same thing, light pressure, rinse your cup out. You can even use this to kind of scrape the paint off your brushes or circle at the bottom of your cup. Get all that paint out from down there. Do a little squeegee with your fingers. And voila. Then here, you're going to take your brushes and you're going to set them face up in this container or in the other container on the other sink. And then your cups can lay flat or upside down to dry.